Alright, so what the hell is this? So over the years, and especially so once I came to Chaos Rising and Retribution, I got a surprising number of comments that were asking me to cover more aspects about the Dawn of War games that are more spoiler-intensive. You know, story beats and endings and that kind of thing. Generally speaking, the reason why I don't do that in the retrospectives is because I don't like to reveal these things to viewers who might have an interest in playing the game outright. In fact, if anything, one of the main reasons I make the retrospectives is to encourage people to play or potentially not play the games that I covered. Although come to think of it, even in the case of Soulstorm, I'd still say that everything I've covered so far has been worth playing. It's just one of these days I'm going to want to cover something that I think is a bad game and I just want to talk about for the hell of it. So I thought it would be a good excuse to, 10 years on from making the original retrospectives and 20 years on from the release of Dawn of War itself, I thought that it would be worth making a little addendum where I can talk a little bit more in depth about the game. On top of this, I also kind of want to reflect a little bit on the original video and the process of making it, as well as on some comments that I got that mentioned some really interesting stuff about the game, or I felt just had some little tidbits that were worth sharing. So those are the main things that I'm going to be covering in this video. This is sort of a companion piece to the original retrospective, and, well, in the case of later videos, it'll also be a way for me to maybe address some things that I got wrong in original videos. Like, there's definitely stuff in, say, Soulstorm and in Retribution that were flagrantly wrong, and I feel as though it is my duty to try and correct those in whatever way that I can. This is going to be a little bit more of one of those put this in the background kind of videos, where there isn't going to be many visuals, it's more going to be something to listen to. Although the second half of this video might have some more visuals if you want to have something to look at. And besides, I'm always after an excuse to talk about more of one of my favourite games ever made, so let's start with revisiting Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War from 2004. One of the big things that I talked about in the original review of Dawn of War was how successful it was as being a good Warhammer 40,000 game. This was a gateway drug for a lot of people to get into Warhammer 40,000, and I say this from personal experience, without too much bias, because there seems to be a whole lot of people who would say the same thing. Nowadays, there are a heck of a lot more ways people can get into Warhammer, but this was a really, really good balance between making something that felt faithful to the essence of the tabletop that Warhammer 40,000 was designed for, faithful to the essence of the story, and also just being a damn good product overall. It was a really good marriage of all of these things that I think made it one of the standout landmark Warhammer 40,000 games. And also, realistically, a really, really good strategy game. It might not necessarily be considered among some of the biggest of real-time strategy games, but there are a surprising number of people who have wanted to see more games like Dawn of War since, and haven't really gotten it. I mean, obviously we know how Dawn of War 3 ended up. I'm even saying there's not even that many other games that do the control point system, or really show that kind of visceral, close combat for one reason or another. In my time as a Warhammer 40,000 fan who has been on the internet, I have noticed something about the Warhammer fandom, which is that it can be an absolute stickler for details. Almost encyclopedic knowledges from various different lore books that, in some ways, actually contradict each other, get very married and attached to the details that build up the Warhammer 40,000 universe. And that means that when something's trying to adapt 40k and gets one of these things wrong, it's considered a pretty glaring flaw of that particular product. But somehow Dawn of War gets away with it. Not that it hasn't been called out about it before, and if anything, I actually considered some of Soulstorm's flagrant disregards to be one of its bigger flaws here. Even if I think if I was to look at Soulstorm again nowadays, I probably wouldn't put down Soulstorm because of those same reasons. I think I'd be more critical of it for just being a very underwhelming sequel and expansion to Dawn of War. And I think the key thing about this is because Dawn of War manages to nail the vibe of Warhammer 40,000 so well, even if it gets these little details wrong, even if it has certain craft worlds or orc clans or space marine chapters use units that they otherwise wouldn't have, it can be forgiven for the fact that it's able to fully embrace this idea of what it means to fight in the 41st millennium. Because realistically, whenever we play the game on tabletop, we're not 100% lore accurate all the time. We're reveling in this gameplay experience of simulating the battles of Warhammer and telling our own story about our own dudes. And that's something that I think gets forgotten about sometimes in online discussions. Like, sure, as we all know, a Space Marine getting gunned down by a couple of guardsmen sounds absolutely preposterous if those guardsmen are equipped with nothing but their standard issue laser pointers. But at the same time, this happens on the tabletop anyway, and no one seems to have an issue with it there. We just accept that that's how the game is sort of run. Dawn of War is an incredibly faithful emulation of Warhammer, and its parallels with the tabletop is a pretty commendable thing to achieve. Even if it could be argued that there are other games that do that a lot better, whether those be turn-based strategy games or real-time games. And I think one of the landmark examples that I can use for this comparison is in Dawn of War's own intro. Now, this intro is absolutely fucking awesome. It was originally created by Blur Studios, who, it's funny to think, have actually made another Warhammer product more recently in Secret Level, and how far, graphical fidelity has come. But I'll admit, it's a bit of nostalgia. I'm very fond of the sort of way that Dawn of War 1's intro looks, even if it is a lot more grainy and more rough around the edges compared to modern-day graphics. But, I don't particularly care. Video games could have looked the same way as they did in, 2013, and I would have been fine with that, honestly. But I want to get to the core of Dawn of War's intro. Just this chaotic battle between a squad, roughly, of Space Marines and a horde of orcs for control over this one battle-scarred hill on this distant planet somewhere in the far future. The sound design is awesome, even if it feels like it's designed to blow your ears out. The animations are a mixture of comical and badass, and there's something about the atmosphere about it which is just brilliant. It just drops you right into the action, it doesn't fuck around, it doesn't do an exposition dump, it just goes, here's some Space Marines and some orcs fighting. That's what most of this game is gonna be. But allow me to highlight a part of this, which I do kind of draw attention to in the original video. Have you ever noticed that a lot of video games might have cinematic intros that don't really resemble the original game much? I'm not just talking about how pretty the graphics are, I'm talking about whether or not they represent what you would actually do in those games. I feel like something like Blizzard's World of Warcraft trailers definitely get a lot of flack for that. And weirdly, the example that came to mind when I was making this was Halo Wars. Halo Wars kind of implies that that game is gonna really have the Covenant put you on the back foot, and it kind of shows just how much of a losing battle humanity is fighting. But when you actually play Halo Wars, you're pretty much always stomping the Covenant and the Flood. You very rarely run into any real sort of gotcha moments unless you're playing on a difficulty well above what you're comfortable with. Plus, you could probably tell me that it's the intro for a boots-on-the-ground first-person Halo game, and it would, convince me because it doesn't really emphasize the strategy a whole lot of the game. Another comparison point I'll make that's a little bit better for this is something like Age of Empires 2, which has two kings playing a chess game, and those pieces turn into buildings and units that they would have in the game that they would be using to fight each other. And that definitely gets the strategy angle down a little bit better, as well as this idea of, hey, you've got buildings and you've got knights and all this kind of thing. But it goes for it a little bit more abstract in a way, and it doesn't emphasize things like the resource gathering or anything like that. But then there's Dawn of War, which shows you mashing a bunch of units together in melee so that you can go and plant a flag on a hill. And that's exactly what you do in Dawn of War. Again, you could probably be fooled into thinking that it was a first-person or third-person shooter game as well, sure. But those flags, man, those are the entire focus of the game, is capturing strategic points so you can fight more battles. And it emphasizes the viscera of the close combat, about the sort of combined arms tactics of using the vehicles alongside your units, and I don't know. If anything, I would say that this intro makes more sense if you know the game's mechanics than it does if you just know Warhammer and you're not playing the game yet. Because why the fuck would you make that suicidal charge so you can plant a fucking flag? Okay, I'm sure that there's some paragraph in some Warhammer lorebook somewhere that says that standard bearers contain some kind of transmitter that means that drop pods can be dropped on your location or something like that. But honestly, to me, it just looks more like the Space Marine Sergeant's just trying to get that line of sight so you can use the orbital relay and drop all of your reinforcements down onto your enemy's base, because that's what I always fucking do. And I don't say this to mock the game, I say this with a full adoration of it. This is something I need to emphasize about this. If it ever seems like I'm poking fun at Dawn of War, I say this because I love this game, and I'm willing to roll with its silliness. I actually think that it's something that keeps me drawn in and wins me over with the game. I mean, if we're gonna get pedantic about it, let's be real here, the name Dawn of War is not a good name for a Warhammer 40,000 game, because the war has been going on for over 10,000 years. Let's talk about Dawn of War 1's story. Out of all of the stories in the Dawn of War games, I still think that Dawn of War 1's is probably the story that has the most to do with its central characters and what those characters are doing. Other than maybe Winter Assault. Like, there might be more moments of character introspection and interaction in something like Dark Crusade or in Dawn of War 2, but I feel like ultimately Dawn of War 2's story is kind of boiled around, hey, the Blood Ravens go and do this thing, and then they go here and they go here, and then there's a traitor, but because that traitor has to be nebulous, it can't revolve around a specific motivation, it just has to be a beat. There is a traitor, the Blood Ravens find the traitor. But here it feels a lot more that the reason why things happen is because Gabriel says, nah, screw this, I'm sending my guys to go after the Maledictum even though the Inquisitor's telling me not to. Or Isidore throws a complete wrench in the plans because he decides to turn on them. Maybe I'm misframing the narrative of the other games as a result of that, but I feel like General Stern is still motivated to do his orders, and Toldir in Winter Assault's still based on her principle to stop the Necrons. The story seems to revolve a lot more around these characters' specific quirks, Gabriel's hunt to help Tartarus and to rid the planet of corruption, while Isidore has his motivation to try and obtain the secrets of Tartarus now that they are being revealed. And the thing is the writing is on the wall as soon as you start playing the game. You know what's gonna happen as soon as a shady little figure appears around the back of Isidore. You know he's gonna turn on Gabriel. It's predictable. And that's absolutely fine, because the interactions between these characters is still really entertaining. Even if it gets to a point where it's almost a little cartoonish, like Isidore decides to go and sneak off and sabotage the transport tanks for the Blood Ravens so they can't go on to their next mission, and oh no, I've got more time to study this dig site, oh no! It almost comes across as a little bit cartoony, but I don't particularly mind, given that the dialogue is performed with such finesse from the actors that I just find it a thoroughly entertaining sort of story. Like, characters like Sindri just completely eat the scenery, like, Scott McNeil does an amazing job with that performance. I think that Paul Dobson does an amazing job, as does Mark Oliver, who's able to play the very stoic Isidore for the most part, but is still able to belt out some incredible yelling once Isidore kind of becomes fully corruptive and his emotions really get the best of him as he yells at Gabriel to say, how does it feel to be more of a monster than me? That's the way that I kind of saw it, because Isidore is manipulated into believing that he can still make the Maledictum serve him, and sees Gabriel as this kind of ruthless arbitrator that set his own family to the torch just so that any doubt there would be removed that chaos was remaining on Cyrene. Like, that's a big thing that weighs over Gabriel, is this idea that he let not only an entire planet of people die in the pursuit of purification, but that he let his own family die. Even if, by the point that he would have done this, he would have been so separated from his humanity that it shouldn't have mattered. But that's kind of the thing I find tragic about Space Marines, is that as much as they try to suppress their humanity, they still are. Like, Dawn of War 2 has some really good dialogue about how once you fully realize yourself as a Space Marine, you find your thoughts and emotions become something so different to that of a regular human beings. But I'm not fully convinced that's the case. I genuinely believe that humanity is something that you can't fully shake when you're a Space Marine. And that's something I find compelling about Gabriel as a character, as well as Isidore. Isidore is so caught up in his own arrogance that he believes that the Maledictum is something he genuinely can use for good. Even if, on the outskirts, if we weren't giving Dawn of War the benefit of the doubt, it becomes another predictable, no, I can take this obvious evil and turn it to my own cause, and I can make this work for me. I think in a way you can kind of enjoy Dawn of War 1's story either as a kind of popcorn movie almost, where you kind of revel in the tropiness of its storytelling, or you can get yourself genuinely invested and find yourself really appreciating characters like Sindri, Gabriel, and Isidore, and the way that they navigate the world that they live in. I mean, Sindri manipulates just about everyone around him, and I assume the main reason he's able to get away with it is because Bale knows that Sindri's the only guy who seems to have this maledictum thing figured out. Like, what the fuck is Bale gonna do? Whereas the Inquisitor is desperately trying to get Gabriel to leave the planet, but ultimately realizes that there's no way in hell the Bloodravens are gonna let what's going down here slide, especially when there's so much secrecy. You've then got the Imperial Guard commander, Colonel Brom, who is just... Something about this character is so funny, because he gets sidelined so fast in that game, he has nothing to do with anything after a while. So much so that I almost kind of commend the Dawn of War novel for trying to do something with him. In the Dawn of War novel, Colonel Brom turns to chaos. He is tired of getting shunted to the side by characters like Isidore, and as a result, he basically turns to chaos and starts becoming just a generic cultist. So, I mean, technically, maybe he does appear somewhere in the game as just some guy that you shoot the shit out of, but oh my god, let's talk about Orcamungus. Man, I am so sorry, Orcamungus, that you just got overshadowed by Gorguts being an infinitely better character. The Orc Warboss design in Dawn of War is really cool. I actually like the Chaos Lord design as well, with the big scythe, with Bale. And if anything, that's one thing I like about a lot of mods for Dawn of War, is that they try to distinguish Nurgle, Khornate, Slaaneshi, and Tzeentchian Chaos Lords by effectively assigning Bale to be the Nurgle Chaos Lord, and keeping the scythe on him, because it's very, very Typhus, as it were. Typhus is a character in the Warhammer tabletop, if you don't know. I think the Eldar might be the weakest link, though, where they make Maka so comically cryptic that she kind of comes across like almost a parody of Eldar writing, where she's just like, this is a key. What's the key for? A key to our doom. And what is our doom? The undoing of us all. Oh, for fuck's sake, Maka, please! I've seen people say that there's a lot of Eldar favoritism amongst Relic, and it's one of the reasons why the Eldar are quite consistently a powerful faction across the Dawn of War games, but I'm not fully convinced, because the way they're portrayed in all their stories is just so obtuse for a race that is supposed to be full of wisdom. Maybe that's kind of the point. If we kind of parody the Space Marines as being, you know, so zealous that they're willing to blindly throw themselves into their own deaths, then maybe the Eldar have their own flavor of that as well, but I don't know. They've always been the weakest link to me, and I've never particularly been too attached to Maka as a character, which is a shame. I'd also say that maybe Dawn of War's story isn't one that particularly needs to get more fleshed out, because, well, the last time that happened, we ended up with the Dawn of War novel, and the Dawn of War novel isn't very good. I've read it firsthand, and I was considering rereading it to do this video, but honestly, I think that could be its own beast entirely. There is a lot to unpack from the Dawn of War Omnibus as a story. But I would say that in spite of it maybe being a little bit silly at times, I really like Dawn of War 1's story. And in many ways, I kind of wished that the Dawn of War games afterwards had a similar focus, you know? I really like the characters in Winter Assault, but if they had a story that was more centered around them, I think I'd be a lot more on board with it. And the main reason that I like characters like Gorguts and General Stern is because they're really good for what material they have been given. Writing and performances all. One thing that I'm a little conflicted about is just how it ends, which is that destroying the Maledictum actually was the worst possible thing that the Bloodravens could have done, because it released the demon residing within the Maledictum permanently, and meant that it would be more of a scourge on the galaxy than if it had remained sealed in the stone. But I do really like Gabriel's little quip afterwards to say that, well, now that you're out here, I can kick your ass. I can destroy you utterly. Like, that feels like a great thing for a Space Marine to clap back against, when a almost immortal, eternal demon is telling you how much you fucked up. It feels very in line with what someone in this setting would say. It's just a shame that Dawn of War 2's storyline kind of shows that, well, the Maledictum probably did more harm being released than it would have done if it had remained sealed, you know? It kind of makes it seem like it's Gabriel's fault that so many people fucking die in Subsector Aurelia. I could potentially go on and on about the story, but I kind of feel like I'll just be saying a whole lot of more redundancies than I already have, so I'm just going to start talking about the levels in the campaign instead. In a way, Dawn of War 1's campaign's kind of split into 3 chunks, which is the first 4 missions being fighting the Orcs, the next 3 being the Eldar, and the last 4 being against Chaos. I almost wonder if there was supposed to be more missions, because 11 is a bit of an odd number, but I guess in a way it means that you'd assume that the game ends at Mission 10, but surprise! Mission 10 is you just dealing with Isidore and you've still got a maledictum to do, so it's probably tricks your brain into thinking there's more game than you otherwise would have anticipated. I think my stance on this campaign hasn't changed a whole lot, which is that this is the easiest Dawn of War game if you're just playing it on the normal difficulty. And one thing I was sort of disappointed to realize upon the revisit was that there's a surprising lack of variety in terms of what your objectives are. If you compare this game to something like Command & Conquer, you'll have stealth missions where you take control of a commando and maybe get a small handful of units and you just have to destroy some things with them. Or you might have a defense mission where you're meant to hold out for a certain amount of time. Whereas Dawn of War 1 will have a few missions that seem like they're going to be that, but they will inevitably become just another build up a base, make a big army, and go to the other side of the map to blow something up. Mission 2 starts out as a stealth tutorial, but eventually you drop a base in and you just make a massive blob of Space Marines. Mission 3 comes across as a defense mission, but it turns out that you're still going to want to go beyond the walls and destroy the enemy base. Mission 8's almost framed like you need to reach this allied outpost before it falls and protects it, but it ultimately just becomes a, hey, blow the gate off of this church, that's how you win the mission. And it doesn't help that because it gradually trickles in what units you can control in the game, I just end up doing the same thing every time, which is just to build a huge army of tactical marines with missile launchers and heavy bolters, and I pretty much plow through everything with those guys, picking them off at range and just moving this massive blob of infantry and maybe a few predators or dreadnoughts. It's only around sort of Mission 9 onwards where I start to mix things up because Terminators come into the fray, and that's more because the Orbital Relay and the Deep Strike kind of lets you mix up your strategy a lot more. That being said, when I play the game on the harder difficulties, that's when the game changes entirely. I was being forced to take different weapon loadouts and to mix up my unit arsenals, and that level of challenge was certainly welcome. Although by the time you get to something like Mission 9, I was just finding it to be a pain in the arse. Having to fight multiple computer players worth of Chaos Forces is a nightmare. As soon as you make progress in one end of the map, it feels like you're assailed on two other ones, and I'll be honest with you, when I was replaying this for this video, I just decided to stop. I streamed most of my playthrough on YouTube, but I figured as I was going into the Chaos levels, I would start playing those in my own time, and I'm glad I did, because otherwise I don't think we would have been in for a good time on stream if I was just throwing myself constantly at these Chaos Forces that just never seemed to end. It's also made me realize that the secondary objectives are not particularly great most of the time. Sometimes they confer a benefit, like, hey, if you capture this machine cult, you'll get access to dreadnoughts. But in other cases, you can completely sidestep a lot of the side objectives, because ultimately you'll usually just need to go to one place and kill one thing, or blow up one thing, and then you're pretty much sorted. You don't confer many benefits from dealing with the secondary objectives. In the case of something like Mission 6, one of the Eldar bases is so far out the way that there's really no reason to ever touch it. I don't particularly mind Dawn of War 1 being a lot more straightforward in its objectives, but it's a shame that some of this stuff just doesn't have a lot going for it. Like, it feels really rewarding in certain games to go, oh, I've gone out of my way to go and get this thing, now I can use it in this mission and it makes a major difference. Such as capturing the Mars Pattern Command Facility in the final mission of Dawn of War Winter Assault. You get a Baneblade. That's radical. It's not your main way of defeating the Necrons, but it sure as hell helps you fend off everything else before they get to you. Sorry, I'm talking a lot about Winter Assault in this video. I'm going to do one of these for Winter Assault and Dark Crusade and everything afterwards as well. I just have to make the comparisons because they're the most immediate things to come to mind with this game. I also can't go through Dawn of War 1's campaign without addressing the Imperial Guard units that you get on some missions. If anything, I was surprised to remember how many times you actually get guard units that you can directly control in the game, right up to Mission 9, I believe. The Leman Russ is just the Orcs looted tank, that's absolutely fine, but Guardsmen effectively have the special weapons of the Chaos Cultists, and as a result of that, it means you can just lob grenades constantly at your enemies and stun them repeatedly. It's pretty fantastic for that. Or you can give them plasma guns and have them kind of bolster your Marines who might not be equipped with heavy infantry stuff. I really underestimated the value of plasma as I was getting into the later points of the game on hard. And then you got Toph, who has a really cool Inquisitor design, even if functionally he's just a Space Marine librarian with a lot less health. But he's still kind of cool. It's strange to think about how much of the story actually revolves around him, and I am honestly rather fond of the scene where he gives Gabriel his demon hammer that ends up being the Force Commander's default weapon from that point onward. Although, it's a bit weird between editions of the game, because sometimes the Force Commander starts with the Demon Hammer, which is supposed to be his ultimate big weapon, and then once you get the Power Sword upgrade, he just loses it in favor of the regular Power Sword again, and it's a bit weird like that. The same thing happens with the Space Marine Librarian too. Oh god, I gotta mention this before I forget. I love the beginning of Mission 9, because Isidore takes a few Space Marines to one side when he's about to, like, turn rogue and get the Maledictum for himself. And he goes, "We have a new way into the temple. Don't tell anyone about this. It's a surprise." And I love that, because those Marines just go with it. They don't appear again in the cutscenes, but just what were they thinking? Were they just like, oh boy, the Force Commander's gonna be so into this surprise? Like, why would they keep that secret? Why would they think that they should do that? Good soldiers follow orders, I suppose. They were probably assuming it would be a birthday party for Gabriel or something, I don't know. Which I guess is a good excuse to talk about the cutscenes themselves, because, oh boy. Now, the cutscenes weren't originally like this, and I had a few comments that were highlighting this point that I will highlight later on in this video. But in the release version of the game, the cutscenes were at least a little bit more fluent. It seems like some of the animations that the characters do in the in-engine cutscenes were more hand-picked to be more appropriate to what they're supposed to be doing. But somewhere down the line, whether it be the operating system changing or updates coming out for the game that break some code, it seems like things just become a lot flimsier, so characters will just die remarkably quickly and the camera will just be lingering there, or characters won't be able to walk onto screen at all, or the animations will just look weird. Like, Gabriel and Isidore will fight, and Isidore will just be kicking the crap out of Gabriel, and then Gabriel will just trigger the sync kill animation and Isidore will just die. It doesn't look particularly elegant, but that was kind of a trapping for the engine at the time, and I can't imagine that a whole lot of time could be spent on refining the cutscenes for this game. This was an era where games had to be produced a lot more quickly than they are now. I do want to know how the AI is supposed to work in these missions though, because it seems like they have a set directive on what to protect and where to move, but at the same time, it'll produce random commander units and just throw them at you, and I'm just like, hang on a second. Haven't I killed Chaos Lord Bane like 3 times now? What is he still doing here? And same thing with the Eldar Farseer as well. I think the only time it's consistent is with the Orc War Boss in Mission 4. He appears once, and you kick the crap out of him. I think I've said about enough that I want to say about the Dawn of War campaign though, so I think I'm just going to go into the general gameplay and skirmish mode of the game. Now, this is something that I have overthought significantly. I don't see many people talk about this, but what is the deal with strategic points? What are they? Why are they there? Why does everyone want them? Why do computers come out of the ground? Why do they confer benefits to every faction? The real answer is gameplay. But think about it from an in-world perspective, right? You have to go to these points and show them a banner or some kind of, like, symbol of your faction. You then have to plant it in the middle, and you have to effectively pray or salute or revere this object as it slowly raises from the ground. And you build these dedicated structures that are designed just to encasing this machine so you can get more of whatever it provides and so that you can fortify it as well. Again, it's all for gameplay reasons. It's to emulate this idea that gaining ground is the important part of fighting a war. But I just like to think of it as an in-universe thing. Like, what is this? Like, these computers are such a lower tech level than whatever the Eldar have to offer, or maybe the Tau or the Necrons have in the later expansions. Yet they still want them. They still benefit from them. What's the deal with that? What are these things? I just love it. Maybe someone in the comment section can dig up an argument or a theory on what these are and why these are something that, you know, work in the context of the game world. I just really like them as this anomaly of game design. I find it so endearing, given that beyond this, every other game has a decent reason for why you're collecting things. StarCraft, yeah, you need all that stuff to power your army. Command & Conquer, Tiberium is like the key to your entire operation. It's the key to the entire plot. Age of Empires, yeah, you gotta feed your troops. You gotta supply your structures with wood and stone. You gotta pay people with gold. Requisition, what is it? It's just magic that's drawn out of the planet. Was it supposed to be like drilling for oil at some point? And then they went, well, why the fuck would the Eldar use oil? So it just became a nebulous thing. I don't know. Dark Age secrets from an ancient time where humanity gained the benefits of the planet through this weird little computer system. And it's just funny to think about it being something that's built across all of these planets, whether that be Tartarus in Dawn of War 1, Lorne 5 in Winter Assault, or Cronus and Kauriva in the later games. It's the same thing with, like, the slag deposits, which, if you're out of ideas on what to insult someone with, call them a slag deposit. I'm sure that, you know, they won't punch you in the face if you do that. Regardless, I've always been really fond of the gameplay of Dawn of War 1, and I think it does a great job of balancing the value between having melee units and between having ranged units. Obviously, in a lot of games, even ones that are designed to have this balance, ranged units are usually just way better than melee ones. But I think a big reason why this works is because, especially in Dawn of War 1, where every faction is a heavy infantry faction, really, there is a much longer time to kill on your units compared to another RTS. Compare it directly to something like Command & Conquer, and if you are not paying complete attention to your units, your guys might just melt within an eye blink. They're just gone. Whereas here, there's a lot more leeway for you to get your units stuck into the action. Even if there is a pretty large gun line of enemies, deep striking your units in, or using jump packs or teleporters to get them in, there's enough time for you to actually get them into a proper melee fight, and that means that having a balance of units is like a really important thing in that game. If anything, the sync kill system has this very weird quirk, which is that if a character is performing a sync kill where they do a big prolonged animation and they punch someone in the face repeatedly, then they're invulnerable until the animation is over, which means that even if your Dreadnought is getting shot by 1,000 missiles, they won't die at all. So you kind of have to ensure that you can kite these units away so that your ranged units can shoot them, or if you have a powerful ranged unit like the Chaos Obliterators, you want to try and get something in melee combat with them, because Obliterators are fucking scary in melee combat in the base game Dawn of War 1. They're like good all-rounders, really. But as long as they're not using their weapons, you're going to have a much better time dealing with them. I also want to commend the morale system. I really like it in Dawn of War 1. This idea that your units can get pushed to the brink and they won't want to fight anymore. Their movement speed increases because they're trying to get the hell out of the fight, but their damage threshold goes down, which can be quite annoying in a sort of competitive fighting perspective. But at the same time, I find it kind of humanizes my little guys. I actually feel quite bad for these pixels on screen where I'm like, oh cool, I'm gonna drop in these Storm Boys and just see what havoc I can wreak. Oh god, they're all being burnt alive. I also want to comment on the unit distinctions as well, because I obviously call the Avatar of Cain a massive fucking demon, and he isn't. But so is the Squiggoth, apparently. They really could have just called that class of unit a monster, and it probably would have made more sense, but demon was more in keeping with the theming of Warhammer 40,000, and I think that, regardless of the particulars, a Space Marine would be willing to call an Avatar of Cain a demon, and some would even argue that it is. Although I think the demon side of thing doesn't really come up a whole lot. I mean, honestly, I mostly just consider how I build my units to be, cool, I need guys good against infantry, guys good against heavy infantry, and guys who are good against tanks. Buildings are basically tanks, so same thing. Demons, well, a demon could be anything from, like, a little guy that throws fireballs to a dinosaur. There's not much of a reason to specifically spec into those things, especially in the original Dawn of War 1. The only thing that's really going to help you there is really just sending your commanders to deal with them. And even then, I'm not sure that every single faction has a commander that's effective against demons specifically. Although that's definitely worth highlighting, which is the unit selection in this game, and I really like the units that Relic tends to choose for its Dawn of War factions, especially in Dawn of War 1. Because there's a lot of emphasis to ensure that these factions are distinct from one another, but they also have some really good gateway units to make you really want to get into Warhammer 40,000 and figure out what the hell that thing is. In a lot of cases, they're kind of a shoo-in, right? Like the Space Marines having the Dreadnought. The Dreadnought is a great unit to choose. This idea of a wounded hero that has been put in this gigantic mecha suit and is forced to continue fighting. That's great to get people an impression of what the Imperium of Man is like. That's another thing, the Skull Probe. Probably the most overlooked unit in Dawn of War. It's great that it's there. It's a great unit to just have to show, like, hey, that's a human head with a computer in it. That's what technology is like in the human factions, you know? Same thing with the Servitor being the builder unit for the Space Marines. Like, it's such a great design. I'm glad they didn't just go with a Tech Priest or a Tech Marine, like they could have done. They're like, nah. Here's the Servitor. Here's your little menial guy that builds shit for you. Or the little Gretchen with their stupid little hammers. Like, it's awesome. They actually designed the Bone Singer for the Eldar specifically for this game, if I'm remembering correctly. And in earlier versions of the game, Bone Singers were actually a really good harassment unit because they were pretty decent in melee combat and they can teleport, which just... it's fantastic. They can just teleport, build a webway gate, and just, like, harass you with infantry that comes out of fucking nowhere. What fun it is to fight the Eldar. But when they were making the units for Chaos, they could have just added the Chaos Dreadnought. I mean, there's already enough parallels of Space Marines. Once you've got Chaos Space Marines, the Chaos Rhino, the Chaos Predator, and the like. But no. They chose the Defiler. A unit which is relatively niche on tabletop as far as I can tell. I don't think many people field Defilers in Warhammer 40k anymore. I don't even know if they even have a set of rules anymore. But the Defiler is such a fucking cool unit! It's a giant crab, and it's got a bunch of guns on it, and it contains a demon inside of it. It's a weird parallel to the Dreadnought. It has this demon locked inside of it that's forced to pilot this big, angry robot crab. You see in its animations, it like thrashes around, smashing stuff with its claws, and it just pulverizes things with the autocannon and the big mortar on the front. It's an all-rounder vehicle, and I think it's one of the big reasons why Chaos doesn't have many vehicle units, because, well, the Defiler's got everything you could possibly need. Why would you need another vehicle unit? It's just brilliant for that. Absolutely brilliant. The same goes with something like the Squig-Off for the Orcs. I think it's a really good choice for the Orcs high-tier unit to just be this massive fucking dinosaur that they built a Howdah on top of that could just plow through enemy lines. I kind of wish that ability was a little bit better against vehicles, but regardless. And there's also the way that they present the units in factions like the Eldar. Like, notice how none of the Eldar units in any of Dawn of War 1 ever show their skin. Like, this is a true story from when I was a child. I remember going into a Games Workshop store, not being a big Eldar fan, I was just kind of browsing the models, and then I saw a Eldar unit where they didn't have the helmet on, they just had their face. I was in the shop with my friend, and we were confused. Because we were like, what the fuck is this? That's a guy. I knew that the Eldar were kind of space elves in a sort of archetype sense, but I didn't realize they were literal space elves. I just kind of thought that either their heads just looked like that, or there was something so alien beneath their helmets that it was like, oh, okay, well, in which case then we can't fully know what these things are. They're so above humans, they're so much more elegant that there's no way they would just look like a human, but with pointier facial features, right? I'm still disappointed to this day that that's not the actual truth, and I kind of like Dawn of War's presentation and mythos around the Eldar a lot more as a result. I'm trying to think about weak links, and I feel like something like the Possessed Chaos Space Marine or Horror are probably the ones I would say, because Possessed Marines kind of like fit this bill of, hey look, these are Space Marines that got so power-hungry, so consumed by their own personal endeavors and their detachment from humanity that they've become these completely twisted beings, and they wreck shop in melee combat, but they just aren't particularly compelling to me. And the same goes for the Horror. It's like, it's cool to see a Tzeentchian demon, and they feel very archetypical of a demon, so much so that whenever I think of a Chaos Demon, I think of a pink Horror of Tzeentch. But at the same time, I feel like there's other demons that I think are a lot more cool or unique in Warhammer's lineup, like the Plague Bearer or one of the Slaanesh demons, I think. I think the Slaanesh demons have some really cool designs. But, you know, Slaanesh gets basically no love in Dawn of War 1 because, well, Booby! Okay, you know what? I think I've put this off a little bit too long. I am going to address something very important. I need to welcome you to the section about the Dawn of War tutorial. I poke fun at this tutorial a lot, across all of the Dawn of War videos, in a way. But I'll have to clear the air about this. The Dawn of War tutorial isn't a bad tutorial. In fact, if anything, it kind of tells you things that the main campaign won't tell you, and there'll be things that you probably won't figure out just by playing the game without the tutorial, like how to spin the camera around and zooming in and all of this stuff. But I think the reason why I'm so critical of it is just because it feels so plodding and long. And honestly, I would rather that the baseline campaign just contained these elements of the tutorial in them without them taking so long. Like, it's such a thorough description that it feels like the tutorial is designed for someone that has never touched a strategy game before, which, to be fair, that might be quite a few people who are starting to play the game. Especially if they're fans of Warhammer who want to play a computer version of it. It just feels like it goes on so long, and you get such a thorough description, and there are plenty of times where the enemy will be attacking you while you're waiting for the tutorial to finish describing something, and if you're totally lost on how to play the game, that's a failure of the design. You're getting shot to pieces by your opponent, and you can't do anything because the narrator voice is trying to tell you what the Space Marine Scout does. It gets gored by a bloodthirster's horns. That's what a Space Marine Scout does in this context. There is also a long rabbit hole to go down of trying to figure out who actually voiced the Dawn of War tutorial. Like a lot of roles in Dawn of War are pretty well credited, but I think that the tutorial voice was one of the developers of the game, but I don't have enough evidence to back that up. I just got that from hearsay. It's the same thing with something like Scott McNeil being the voice of Boreal, which needs to be addressed in the Soulstorm video because apparently that is wrong. So you know what, I'm going to take a step back from this now, and I'm just going to start talking about the visuals of Dawn of War 1. I've seen an awful lot of people say that they want to see a remaster or remake of Dawn of War 1 in some capacity, and I've never been in with that crowd because, simply put, I think that Dawn of War 1 is fine as it is. The only thing I'd really want from a remaster would be a means to let people mod that game a lot more easily. Just because of the way that Dawn of War 1 is coded, it's apparently quite difficult to implement modding, as it were, and it's kind of why a lot of mods kind of circulate around these small teams that produce these big, overwhelming projects like Ultimate Apocalypse or Unification or something like that. But the main reason I don't think that you need to remaster Dawn of War 1 is because I think it looks fine. I don't really have an issue with its graphical fidelity at all, and I think that if you were to remaster this game, unless you have a team that absolutely adores this game and relishes in its art style, I think something would absolutely be lost. I think Dawn of War would be made to look more like every other Warhammer thing on the market. I don't think you would have these weird coloured gradients in the sky, like the, I want to say it's a weird thing I noticed about the campaign, which is that the Orc missions all have a yellow sky, the Eldar missions all have like this grey, purple, lilac sky, and the Chaos missions all have an orange sky right up until the Maledictum that has the red warp sky. You've also just got a very loose definition on what Tartarus even is. I think it's supposed to be an agricultural world, but you don't fight through massive fields of crops, you delve into jungles, you defend these sprawling cities, you venture into the countryside and into these ravines and quarries and chasms. I'm glad it isn't a single biome planet, to be fair. Like, that's something that kind of gets my goat a bit about the way people interpret Warhammer planet classifications. But it's just funny to think about what you even define Tartarus as. What does it do for the Imperium? Why are we fighting over this rock? These poor people are living on a planet that's probably worth almost nothing to the Imperium of man at large, which, in a way, kind of makes it a pretty good setting for the game. It just makes for this really interesting atmosphere when it comes to the environment and everything, and I'd say the same thing about the user interface. There's something fantastic about the user interface I really enjoy. Especially some of the unique stuff that's specifically to just Dawn of War 1, such as the little screen that pops up with the mission briefing, and it's the perspective of a skull probe that's like flying through the ruins and battlefield trying to get information before you start fighting the battle. and you see it slowly, like, crash into the ground. And plus they've got the little skulls all over the user interface whenever you're playing as the Space Marines as well. Or even the main menu, realistically. It's like this mixture of parchment and bone and metal and wires. It's this really great marriage of all of this particular flavor of punk. What would you call this? Like, church punk? I also like the little loading screen in both the skirmish and in the campaign. In the skirmish mode, the loading screens are just these various different, like, pictures, like, rendered art of different units in the faction. And you don't get anything like it in the expansions at all. Whereas in the campaign, it's showing this map of Tartarus and just how much of it is being overrun with orcs and where Chaos has started, like, setting up shop. And by the end of it, it just becomes this complete static as the Warp Storm has borderline cut the Blood Ravens off from their battle barge in space. But another thing as well is that on the main menu, you don't get a commander that pops up like in the expansions, which I think a lot of people are used to. Instead, you just get one of the frontline guys. Like, the Space Marine has a little servo skull that's flowing next to him, and then you got the Eldar just cross-armed with the little curvy combat knife they have. They kind of ooze with the personality of those factions. I really, really enjoy Dawn of War 1's main menu screen, and I think in an odd way I actually kind of prefer it over just having your commander gawk at you with their idle animation on. And I would be remiss to not talk more about the Army Painter. I love Dawn of War 1's Army Painter because it lets you pick very, very precise colors for your units. So you can have units that have these garish neon colors all over them that just never look right at all on the models, but you can still just go with it. You can go nuts with whatever you like. I would have kind of preferred if you had more customization options on what parts of the army you could paint, or specific models and units that you can choose to have in certain colors. I think that would have been awesome, but I get why that second part is limited because, well, you could make all of your units different colors, and then it becomes fucking impossible for your opponent to figure out which unit is from your army and which one is from a different enemy's army, you know? I guess it is fair that some of the models in the original Dawn of War 1 look a little bit goofy, or at the very least they are, compared to a, like, modified version of the model where it's supposed to fit the proportions of the tabletop or an actual human being. But I think, in a way, they work well enough to communicate the designs and unit shape and animations of these characters well enough. Shape theory is quite important when it comes to making units, and I think that might be one of the reasons why, like, the heads and shoulders and stuff of the Space Marines are so exaggerated, as well as other features on certain models. It's just so that it makes it easier to see from such a high-up position. Hey, why does every single orc have the little ponytails on their heads when tabletop orcs have a big mixture of different helmets and things? Well, it's because it makes it easier to know whether or not you're fighting a slugger boy, a shooter boy, or a tank buster. But I can't neglect the other half of the presentation of this game, which is the sound. The voice acting, oh my god, I think I said almost everything I needed to say about Dawn of War 1's voice acting. I think it is so fucking good. I still love it to pieces. Although, I will say that since replaying the game, I have found one bad bit of voice acting. And I would say that is the maledictum at the end of the game. I don't even know if it's the voice actor's fault, but the filter over it sounds terrible. It just pops out so sorely compared to everything else. I've seen comments on the retrospective as well say that units like the Chaos Cultists don't have very good voice acting, but I think that the voice acting on those units is outstanding. I think it's really well done. I think it's more that, well, it's screechy and garish, and that's kind of the reason why people might just find it more irritating. It's too good at its job. I will also say I do have a slight pet peeve with how when you're playing the campaign and Gabriel pops up to say something like story related in the corner, anytime you select one of your units, they will repeat their voice lines, and so you just get all this overlapping speech, and it's just it's a clusterfuck. I hate it. I hate it so much. I'll also readdress the little bit I said about the sound effects, which is that I think the Dawn of War 1 sound effects are fine, but when you listen to them in isolation, you go into the sound files, you convert them over into an MP3 or something, and you listen back to them. In a vacuum, most of the sound effects are really, really good. There's only a few exceptions, like the autocannon on the Obliterator sounds terrible. but it's more that just because of the way that it's mixed so that all these sound effects don't blow your eardrums off as soon as an engagement happens, it just means that some of them sound more underwhelming, like the bolter. And I still stand by that games like Dawn of War 2, Warhammer 40,000 Regicide, and Space Marine do a much better job of presenting the bolter than Dawn of War 1 does. The music as well is so unique compared to the rest of the Dawn of War games afterwards, namely because it has a entirely different composer from the others. I think people sort of forget that a lot of Dawn of War 1's tracks are surprisingly melancholic and somber. You listen to tracks like Chant, or you listen to Urban Wasteland, or to Outer Reaches, and there's a lot more emphasis on these quiet moments, calms before the storms, the dawn of war, as it were. And while the overall soundtrack isn't necessarily that memorable, I think it has these really great standout tracks that don't get reused in the later expansion packs. I guess it means that they have more impact here in Dawn of War 1 as a result of that. Whereas tracks like Force Commander, which is amazing, kind of get overused in Dawn of War's expansions. But it's still a bit of a shame that some of the best doesn't get reused. But it also means that some of the worst also don't get reused. There is a track on the soundtrack that's just called Evil Isidore. Yep, what a name. It's completely fine. It's the same with the Orcs track. The Orcs theme is completely okay. They get quite a raw deal compared to how, like, the Eldar have quite a unique sound to theirs, except for their battle theme. And Chaos have some really good tracks, and the Space Marines have their really distinct theme that anyone who's played this game would recognize. There's also the song that's just called Dawn of War. That one's more unremarkable than I expected. I don't think it's a particularly great track, but it's fine as like a background piece. And then there's the main menu theme that doesn't actually appear on a lot of rips of Dawn of War soundtrack, and I don't know why. This metal band used the entirety of it as an opening for like a 12-minute long song they did, which is awesome, but it also means that I get copyright striked anytime I use it on YouTube now, which... thanks, YouTube. Oh god, okay, well I'm definitely cutting this down, but right now I'm looking at about an hour's worth of speech, and I want to now segue over to talking about the original retrospective that I did way back in 2015. It is fascinating to think how far I've come when it comes to making the retrospectives, because I think that my first one is definitely rough around the edges, although I will say that it came out quite a lot better than I had expected, and the secret to that is that this wasn't the first iteration of a Dawn of War retrospective that I was trying to do. Actually, if anything, back in 2014, I was kind of hoping that the first retrospective I'd make on YouTube would be about Crash Bandicoot, of all games. But ultimately, since I was knee-deep in the Alpha Legion at that point in time, which was a Warhammer 40,000 fan group, I decided to focus on Dawn of War instead. And I'm pretty sure I have an old version of that Dawn of War retrospective still kicking around somewhere that I could potentially grab some clips of. I still don't fully remember why I actually decided to chuck that original draft out and went with the one that I did instead. I think it might have been because it was more focused, I suppose. I always try to make these retrospectives relatively concise, and it almost got to a point where I considered a video that would be longer than 15 minutes long to be too much. I even say that in this retrospective, which is really funny to think about in this era of 14-hour Persona 5 video essays. That's real. What's that? I've spent 1 hour talking about one game? Anyway. But this project was my first time using Vegas 13 for a proper big video, Sony Vegas 13. And I also filmed all of this with Fraps, of all things, which is incredibly outdated by today's standards, and Fraps video files were just absolutely terrible for compressing anything. I would have like 30-second clips that would go up to 1 gigabyte on my hard drive, and I think I still have a few of those clips still kicking around. For now though, I'm going to show a couple of clips from the original retrospective and a few comments that I wanted to make on them as a result.
The most successful video game series tied to the Warhammer 40,000 franchise. And there's not much else competing for that title.
At the time, this was pretty much true, but it's nice to see that as we've gotten into the modern age, that there's an awful lot more candidates for that now. I mean, between Mechanicus, Darktide, Space Marine 2, those are all games that have kind of plunged 40k into a little bit more of a mainstream space on the internet.
A couple of games from back then are defended as being pretty good, but it was, for the most part, a dark age of technology.
I'm surprised I didn't get called out for this joke, because this is one of those ones people could, actually... The Dark Age of Technology is supposed to be like a better time for the Imperium of Man compared to what the 41st millennium is actually like for them now, but I think devoid of context, it still kinda works. I don't know.
Dawn of War?
God, I remember spending ages on this graphic, back when I had paint.net and didn't have access to Photoshop. I feel like I should remake it at some point with some better editing tools. Oh god, I just noticed that a servitor is C-3PO.
The human-controlled planet of Tartarus is being overrun by a race of barbaric, war-hungry savages, who are defending themselves from the orcs.
I'm still proud of the timing and sound on both of these jokes, both this one as well as the the little guy running around Tartarus.
Bale and Sindri, who surprisingly don't resemble Bulk and Skull.
There was a comment that was telling me off for making this reference, that was telling me that I was too young to be making a reference to Bulk and Skull. And to that I say, how dare you? I had VHSs when I was growing up. My family was always behind the curve on technology, and I was happy that way. I think Dark Crusade might have been the newest game that I'd actually bought. Like, I bought it roughly when it came out.
It's a fairly predictable plot.
Ah, this Ancient Evil Awakenings graphic. I was originally planning to sneak this into every single Dawn of War retrospective in some way or another, but I think I ultimately decided against it by the time I was making Chaos Rising. Because, well, this is one of those jokes that only really makes sense in, like, my own head, where I have the full context for it. This panel comes from a advert for Halo 4, when they were trying to reintroduce like a whole new threat to the Halo franchise now that the Covenant and the Flood were gone. And I always just thought it was the most boring thing they could have done, because an Ancient Evil Awakens resembles just about every science fiction or fantasy story out there. It's either an ancient evil has awoken, or aliens have happened, right? But the reason why I think I stopped doing it was because it just made it seem more like I was poking fun at Dawn of War for this plot point, than poking fun at Halo 4, which is what I was intending to do with it.
I am pretty sure that spending 10 years listening to these voices have turned my balls into ceramite.
There's lines like these that make me wonder who I was targeting this video at, because this is like one of those ones that only makes sense if you know anything about Warhammer. Because ceramite is power armor, that's the material used for it. If you don't know what that is, you probably think I'm just talking about fucking clay. Target audience is definitely something that flip-flopped a little bit as I was trying to make these. Was I trying to review this from the time that it had come out, or was I trying to review it from the perspective of now? Was it targeted to people who had never played Dawn of War, or was it something to reflect on if you were familiar with Dawn of War? I like to think I was trying to aim for new people who hadn't played Dawn of War yet, but if that was the case, why the hell did I make this joke? Oh god, I feel like I had to put that caption there, otherwise this joke wouldn't have made any sense to anyone. It just looks like me freaking out of the game being played. I think what I was going for is that because the orcs are like thumping the ground, they're disrespecting the sacred land. I didn't have the best material when I started out.
And you could even get to see them exchange blows and flinch from attacks.
God, there would be a lot of people who'd be unhappy to see Eldar, even if these were Guardians, you know, getting beaten by malnourished cultists with sharp sticks. But those people would also be unhappy with Space Marines getting shot to pieces by guardsmen, so...
Okay, so perhaps the first time I saw a big mech grab a Chaos Cultist and drain enough gore to make Tarantino shed bloody tears.
I think this particular kill animation has stuck with me because one time I was playing this game, Winter Assault more specifically, and my mum had come into the room to give me a drink or something, and she saw that happen on screen, and her immediate reaction was just, well, that's not very nice, was it? And it's just, I just love that reaction to something that's so viscerally violent on screen. Especially given that my parents were not cool with me playing games that were particularly violent. Like, I was banned from having anything that was rated 18 or over. Yet for some reason, something like Dawn of War was able to get snuck in. I was allowed to play that. That was fine.
It wasn't about picking bushes or George Bushes. It was about of crusaders in space killing things they don't understand.
This quote made its way onto, like, the 1D4chan article for Space Marines for a while. Or I think the Black Templars. And that was a very weird feeling to get when I saw that.
You know, it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, if this was happening to you, you wouldn't stick around for it. Would you? Do you think you're hard or something? Do you think you're fucking tough? Do you like fucking walk around in winter without a shirt on, like you're fucking John Cena dressed as Crash Bandicoot? I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about.
This is probably the most forced joke in the original video, if I can be honest, although at the same time it gave birth to the Muscle Man thumbnail.
And the Eldar, an army with specialized units which were intended to be stealth and speed focused, but you can just kind of make one of every unit and use them like skinnier orcs.
I can't believe I neglected to mention Bright Lance platforms when I was talking about the Eldar, because in the original Dawn of War, they're a pain in the fucking ass. Okay, I have a note here that just says, holy fuck the Walkman.
Which I'll admit to listening to quite frequently in my spare time, has this under his repertoire as well.
And I had a few comments that also said, oh my god, the Walkman, the MP3 Walkman. I had a weird thing about just separating my gadgets up. I didn't like having them all on one thing, because, you know, if my phone breaks, then I'm not going to be able to listen to anything. I think I still have that Walkman on me, all things considered. It's somewhere around here.
You can even hear influences to his later work in some of Dawn of War's tracks.
I'll admit this music comparison was a stretch, but I think as I was editing this video, it was one of the only ones that I could find off the top of my head. It's funny because in the comments people mentioned some much better examples of where Jeremy Soule's work sounds very, very similar to his work in Dawn of War.
If I had to put a score on the game's quality, taking into account the content, presentation, depth, and narrative, I'd probably give it somewhere around an 8 out of 10.
Remember when I did number scores? I ultimately stopped doing these after Soulstorm because putting a numbered score on Dawn of War 2 to compare it to Dawn of War 1 I thought was going to be pedantic at best and almost skewering people's perception on Dawn of War 1 and 2 at worst. Would I be petty enough to give Dawn of War 2 a 7.9 instead of an 8 just because I prefer Dawn of War 1 more? Or would I have to put them both at the same number and try to argue around it? I think I just decided that trying to compare Dawn of War 1 and 2 with a numbered score would just be antithetical to the point that I was making, which was that they are both really good games in very different ways. And as a result of that, I just don't bother with numbers anymore at all.
But that's mostly if you want to play hardcore competitive matches like CSGO or Splatoon or The Sims.
Even at the time I thought about cutting this one, I don't know why I stuck with it. I think I was just figured, well, I might as well just see how it goes, because this initial video was very much a gamble just to see, you know, what my video making was going to be like, what people enjoyed, and how I was going to do this in the future. If I was to do some kind of supercut cutting all of the retrospectives together into one big thing, which some people have asked for, then I would probably at least shorten this joke if I could help it.
How's XCOM been going, buddy?
I fucking hate the Long War!
I still hate the Long War. Alright, now for the last stretch of this video, the comments. This was one of the big reasons I wanted to do this. A lot of creators will read their comments, and I'm one of those that does exactly that. I read pretty much all of them if I can find them. And while it's pretty common to highlight a lot of negative ones and to poke fun at them, I instead would rather take this opportunity to highlight some that bring some extra things to the discussion. Whether those be some memories that people were sharing, or if they were little factoids about the game that I either hadn't realized or I'd failed to mention. So these are the ones that I wanted to highlight from the last 10 years of comments from this video. I'll start with this one. For all the negativity some 40k fans rightfully get, playing Skirmish was the first time a stranger took the time to clue me in on a game out of the kindness of their heart, showing me some of the basics of getting a good build planned. It was a bit like a chess lesson, but far more entertaining. Thank you, unknown Dawn of War player. You own. See, this is the kind of thing I love. This is the stuff I like to see. It's knowing that something really good came out of this game. There's quite a few stories about people playing this game and then learning to get into tabletop, or some people were even talking about how they got into tabletop and then started playing this game. Although I must admit that some of them were maybe a little bit too long for me to read out in this video. Although there is a top reply just below it. You got lucky. I got rolled in a 3v3 and got called a slur. Hold on, where did that image of the Chaos Space Marine come from? In which Legion is there a grey and green colour scheme? That's definitely not the Alpha Legion colours. Hold on, what are they talking about? 735. Oh, it's this graphic. Wait a minute! Wait! How have I not noticed that? Who the fuck are they? Hold on a minute. I'm gonna go get my, like, 3.5 Codex edition of Chaos Space Marines. I'm gonna double check to see if there's one like that in there. Yeah, I can't find a chapter that resembles that in the 2002 Chaos Space Marine Codex. And even when I looked online, the closest color scheme I could find was one for a Renegade chapter called The Purge, and I have a suspicion those were made long after Dawn of War came out, so I feel like this render got made well before, like, the army painter was finalized, and this is just a weird color scheme that they made in it. Pretty dope looking, though, I'm not gonna lie. I also like this bit at the bottom here. Ah, fuck, the logo got in the way. The Eldar rescue mission in Dawn of War 2 was just brilliant, even to this day, some 15 plus years later. I'm assuming by Dawn of War 2 you mean Winter Assault, and by Eldar Rescue Mission you mean Between a Stone and an Axe. Because yes, that one is great. That's one of the best missions in Winter Assault. Winter Assault was amazing as you can command me. You're absolutely right, Winter Assault is goated because you can command Guardsman Greg. He's easily top 5 Dawn of War characters. That opening cutscene was so mind-blowing in 2006 that I spent the next several months emptying my bank account on Space Marine minis and even got a Space Marine tattoo within the year. I had never seen so much concentrated badassdom before. Badassdom? That's one of those words that sounds weird in my accent. Yeah, no, it's genuinely fantastic. It got me hooked into Dawn of War as soon as I saw it. I still think it's one of the best cutscenes I've seen as an opening to a video game. I like how this video makes it clear the game is being judged on its release without directly stating it. Yeah, I think that's what I was going for initially, and I think my focus on how I review games kind of got muddled as time went on, because nowadays, I do prefer to look at it in a sense of, hey, you're buying this now because you are you right now, and you want to know how good this game is and if you want to buy it. But I think initially my goal was to try and review the game on the merits of its time, and I guess in a way I still kind of do both, I just don't explicitly say it. The thumbnail changed! Something is happening from 6 years ago. Okay, right, this one I gotta address. So if you are a long-term subscriber of mine, you might have found that suddenly in 2019, my thumbnail for the first Dawn of War video changed. I didn't do that. YouTube was doing this weird thing where it was experimenting with how many more views a video would get if the thumbnail changed to something radically different. I think as it was trying to figure out what the best kind of thumbnail there is for YouTubers. But in the case of my channel, yeah, it did increase views because people saw the thumbnail changed and thought something was going on. Either that or the YouTube algorithm just really liked the Bulk and Skull joke for some reason. It was really annoying. It kind of remained that way until I standardized all the thumbnails in 2023 to make them a little bit more uniform. Hang on, there's a reply to this one. Oh shit, Custard Boy is awake! Love how this video is almost 10 years old. I used to set my PC to execute Dawn of War at 6:30 AM so I'd wake up to work to the sounds of the glorious battle in the intro. Made for a decent morning and got me in the mood to work. That is one hell of a way to get started. The best part of waking up is shell shock. About the memorable lines. My friend is a huge fan of Company of Heroes. We played it a lot but never actually used any voice lines as a joke. And when I found out about Dawn of War a few months ago, thanks to you, my friend, I immediately showed it to my friend, and after 2 games he kept screaming in Discord, "Sir, yes sir, it will be done," which we were using even while playing Company of Heroes. That is a testament to how strong this voice cast was. Honestly, they all did a bang-up job. Except for the Maledictum guy, I guess. The armor type and green eye lenses of Blood Ravens shown in the video. Is it a mod, or is it vanilla? Aha! So, green-eyed Blood Ravens are only a thing in the campaign. And that's because that's part of their original color scheme. Whereas in the skirmish and multiplayer, all Space Marines are standardized as having red eyes, because, well, I guess the Ultramarines have red eyes, and so do a lot of Space Marine chapters by default. Especially the Founding Legions. Please someone tell me what the sound effects is on the game mechanics screen at 436s. I know I've heard it before and it's driving me crazy. To which the top comment replies, Crash Bandicoot when you collect a Wumpa Fruit. Yep. 107. Is that the sound of taking an apple in Crash Bandicoot? A surprising number of people think those sound effects are from Spyro. Nope, they're all Crash Bandicoot sound effects. Isn't that the sound of destroying a barrel in Icewind Dale 2? You know, it isn't, but they probably used the same sound bank, because that was pretty common back then. Do you find it very odd that I mute all the music and only have the other sounds be unmutated? Unmutated? God, what the fuck are you doing to the music? What? Please! These tracks are sacred! Wait, at the beginning, is that Lewis from Yogscast, the one holding the camera? It sounds like him. I haven't been in touch with the person who was filming that opening shot for a long time, but I don't know how they would feel about being compared to the Yogscast. You should make videos using the Captain General in frame explaining the stuff. That would be hilarious. I definitely get the appeal of this. For those of you who don't know, one of the big things I'm known for on the internet is voicing the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes in a Warhammer 40,000 parody series called If the Emperor Had a Text-to-Speech Device. God, that title is a mouthful. And so a lot of people associate my voice with the character. But one thing I've always wanted to make clear is that I as a person have quite a separation from that character. And as a result, whenever I make stuff on the channel, I prefer to use the cat to represent myself if I can help it. Honestly, my persona on the internet's been in a bit of a weird place. I think there was a while where I wanted to go live action, but since then, I prefer the funny cat. I had to watch this again today just for that barbaric war-hungry savages joke. It's still one of my favorite ones from the video, and I'm glad that people still like it. The Volcano soundtrack was part of the Path of Exile main screen. Well, there you go. That's a better example of Jeremy Soul's tracks kind of overlapping in places. Oh man, some of the music Jeremy Soul made for Dawn of War is so similar to Elder Scrolls or Knights of the Old Republic music that at one point I thought you were playing the Sith Guard battle theme. Exhibit B. It's kind of a shame about all the stuff around him, I suppose. Ultimate Apocalypse makes this game perfect. Not to me, but fair. The later patches and Winter Assault kind of broke all the in-engine cutscenes in this game. They look better and made more sense in vanilla. This is quite similar to another comment. Interesting notice, so apparently running Dawn of War on a 64-bit OS affects the lip syncing in-game. Or at least something to do with the GPU. I recall back in 04 that the lip sync was pretty good, then playing on Windows 8 made it wonky as heck. I was like, what the fuck, I don't remember this being that bad. Food for thought. That is the thing. I remember playing this game initially and the animation syncing up a heck of a lot better with, you know, where characters were supposed to be. And I think if you watch the cutscenes on Big Dick Cheney's channel, then I think it still has some of the original animations there, back in the state where they were supposed to be. Nice video. Can't wait for more. Also, while I agree with the voice acting 99%, are you ignoring Lord Bale? His acting is not great. Okay, if we're talking on acting merit, it's just kind of fine. The dude is a weird, sniveling snot man who's gonna get stabbed in the back immediately. Like, I think his voice fits perfectly for the part. I don't think it's bad voice acting in the slightest. It's the same thing with the Chaos Cultist and Heretic lines that people have issues with as well. It's maybe too good of its job at being revolting and off-putting. This game has become a game like Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. If I see it somewhere, I'll end up installing it to play. Well, off to kill a few days. Oh boy, this channel is going to become a nightmare for you in a few months. I think what I like about Dawn of War's graphics over other old RTS games is, number one, it's not 2D. I don't know why, I just don't like 2D RTS games. And number two, it's not grainy. I've seen other old 3D RTS games that look exactly as old as they are. Every missing/double pixel is noticeable. Dawn of War is just the right flavor of retro gaming. Yeah, I think that's a pretty big thing about Relic's RTS games, that they're all in this sort of live 3D engine. Same thing kind of goes for Homeworld, I think. And as a result, they age a lot better, which is kind of what backs up my point about how Dawn of War I don't think really needs a remaster or anything. I do sort of get the point that some of the older 2D games like Age of Empires or the earlier Command & Conquers are maybe not so nice to look at nowadays, although I've never had a problem with those personally. Plus the CNC remasters does a generally good job with CNC, even if the cutscenes look a bit weird with the upscaling. You've hit on the primary reasons why I dislike Winter Assault. By this point it seems obvious StarCraft/Warcraft and Warhammer had begun inspiring each other, and the original Dawn of War campaign easily follows the layout of something like StarCraft or Warcraft's plot/intent of campaign. The campaigns in either of Blizzard's titles are meant to teach people how to use each race by adding the game's units to each mission. Missions are technically only hard when the player is not accustomed to gameplay. In each of Blizzard's games, each race gets a campaign to display how they work and when the units are utilizable. Dawn of War follows this method, and it was a good idea to do so, but they drop it in the following iterations. Winter Assault tries to jam the remaining races and one new race into a campaign shorter than the first. There's no linear progression or explanation on how to use the race outside of the tutorial, which will give some pointers but ultimately is not as good of a teacher as the linear level-based progression. I had to look up proper Imperial Guard use in a guide, which took me from hating them to loving them. Winter Assault felt more like an expansion of an expansion, wherein it was expected we had already played scenarios for each race, and now we were presented with harder versions to challenge us while simultaneously adding to the story. I've had to put down Winter Assault in favour of just moving forward with the series and getting good through skirmish play in Dark Crusade, which unfortunately is still making it hard to learn how races operate, as I have to speed read every unit and ability while simultaneously engaging in skirmishes. I love the original Dawn of War games, but it's just really unfortunate each race did not get a proper campaign polish. This is a very good point, although I think I disagree with the point that Winter Assault doesn't teach you at all how to play the new races. I think in most cases, especially for like the Orcs and Chaos, it's relatively obvious what each of those units are going to be strong with, while the Imperial Guard will introduce newer units to you and generally seems to highlight what they actually do well. Hellhounds is an anti-infantry unit, Sentinels is a fast scout unit that can take down tanks, just as an example. Speed reading through the race while trying to learn what they're doing is something I definitely struggle with if I'm ever trying out a mod in multiplayer, because usually mods are just trying to make so many new units for the game that I have no idea what the hell I'm doing and I end up getting steamrolled. And I think the last comment I'm going to take is this one. I preferred the Necron voice actors. And I think with all of that said, that's probably the most that I want to get out of doing this little revisit of Dawn of War 1. I mean, realistically, I could probably talk until the cows come home, but there are 3 more expansions to go for just Dawn of War 1 alone, and I'm pretty sure that I'll be able to mention more things about Dawn of War 1 when I compare them to the later expansions. I mean, I keep talking about Winter Assault during this whole video, so... And that is important to note that, yeah, I'll do something like this for the other videos as well, so if there's anything you've ever wanted to get off your chest about Winter Assault, then I might read it out in a video like this in the future. As for future videos, well... Tell you what, let's take this opportunity to do a minor update for the channel. Where the hell is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines? Where the hell is Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver? Where the hell is the second part of the mod video? Well, for starters, that's probably going to be the order that those videos come out in. As for why the mod video is pushed so far to the back, it's because, realistically, it's a video that I want to get right. I'll be real and say I'm not super happy with the first mod video, and I think that for the second one I want to be a lot more thorough and do my best to represent the Dawn of War 1 modding scene as best as I can. So I'm wanting to develop that in the background while I cover some other pending stuff on the channel. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines is coming along a lot nicer though, and that's something I hope to have some results for in February. Although now that I've said it, I've probably jinxed it. Although before that comes out, I'll probably end up doing a best-of for The List Goes On, which is the other podcast that I released alongside Return to Sender on my second channel, ThunderPsyker. But in between those videos, I might also do a few more things like this, just because it's kind of nice just to talk about the original Dawn of Wars in a little bit more detail, and to have an excuse to talk about them more after I've already done the retrospectives years and years ago. That being said, if you absolutely hate this video and you don't want to see anything more like this on the channel at all, please comment the entire Dawn of War tutorial word for word, because that gets the point across pretty well if you've got that kind of commitment. As you're well aware, it's been about half a year since I put something out on the channel, and I wanted to put this out as a little bit of evidence that, hey, I ain't gone, I'm still trying to do this. It was just that during the second half of 2024, in order to keep the roof over my head, I ended up working with Alpha Abuser on his own YouTube channel to do a little bit of editing work for Hunter the Parenting and Norfolk Wizard Game. If you like videos like this where you can kind of put them on in the background and listen to them, then the audio logs for Hunter the Parenting are exactly like that. I'd probably recommend just starting with the beginning of Hunter the Parenting. You don't want to jump into Akira Cross cold turkey, like damn. There may be a chance I might also continue to stream Dawn of War as well. Like, this has come out before I finish streaming Dawn of War 1, although I'm thinking about maybe switching streaming over to the second channel, just because streaming stresses me the fuck out, and putting it on my main channel is something that kind of compounds that stress into incredible levels. Anyway, I need to get the fuck out of here, because Tartarus is going to hell in a handbasket, so, I'll catch you on the Thunderhawk out. Thank you to all the patrons and channel members who have been supporting me, with an extra special thanks to my Baneblade tier subscribers, Adiros, Alexis Athena, Brandon Hickey, Carbon Green, Casey, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Diomedes Nuts, Epsilon, Gorgeous Freeman, Just a Guy, Obama, Old Man Jenkins, Raziel Martellus 96, Watcher, Witcher 122, Whiskey Hero, and Warlock Scrack.